Hi everyone, thank you for joining us at the CGLCC's 2021 Digital LGBT+ Global Business Summit New World. My name is Lori Benson, Environmental Social Governance Service with EY, a proud sponsor of the summit and of this next session. ESGS actualizes EY's supplier diversity program across the globe. In fiscal year 21, EY delivered 125 development programs impacting 3,400 Indigenous and minority entrepreneurs. By 2025, we aspire 75% of our suppliers by spend to have science-based targets. We also have developed supplier diversity programs running in 26 countries. I'd like to take a moment to share with you one of the most important actions we are taking to help support Indigenous and minority entrepreneurs with access to EY's global supply chain. We strengthened EY's global procurement policy and supplier code of conduct. At this moment, in procurement, you are required consultation with ESGS for all projects equal to or above $250,000. ESGS consult is required before moving forward with the sourcing strategy to ensure inclusion of qualified diverse suppliers for consideration. In closing, EY is committed to the development and growth of diverse business enterprises to build a better working world and to expand networks to build trusted and enriched relationships. I would like to introduce our final session of the day before closing remarks, an LGBT+ out leadership discussion with Katie Dudtschak, Executive VP, Regional Banking, Personal and Commercial Banking, RBC Royal Bank, and Nadia Theodore, who is Senior VP of Global Government and Industrial Relations with Maple Leaf Foods. Have a great evening, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Nadia Theodore, Senior Vice President, Global Government and Industry Relations at Maple Leaf Foods. And we have come to the closing session for today, sponsored by EY as part of the New World 2021 Digital LGBT+ Global Business Summit, and hosted, of course, by Canada's LGBT+ Chamber of Commerce. I am so looking forward to this conversation that we're going to have today, this afternoon, and really, really delighted to be facilitating this closing session. And, you know, I just want to say, actually, that I am looking forward to the conversation, not only because I obviously enjoy being in conversation and sharing spaces with impressive and inspiring leaders like the one that we are about to meet, but also because I think that beyond all of the great practical business and market access resources that you, the participants, are getting access to over the course of this conference, the other key theme that is being explored through conversations like the one that we are about to have is really around the interconnectedness of personal journey, the ability to live authentically, and a business or career journey, and the ability to have a career or a business that you are proud of, the interconnectedness of those two things. And I really believe that you can't have one without the other. And in learning about the person that we are about to have a conversation with, that you are about to hear from, I personally think that she is a role model and living testament to that truth. So, you know, I don't actually think that she needs any introduction. I'm sure that we've all heard about her, if not know of all of her accomplishments and her great journey. And we are going to hear about who she truly is beyond the bio, but I will start with a little bit of a formal intro. So Katie Dudtschak is Executive Vice President, Regional Banking, RBC, where she oversees more than 20,000 retail, commercial, and specialist advisors across the country. And in her role, she has undertaken a significant transformation of the retail bank's distribution model and helped shape the development of RBC's purpose and collective ambition, as well as its strategy as a digitally enabled relationship bank. During this time, her team achieved multiple years of industry-leading client experience, employee engagement, and business growth results, as well as top industry honors from J.D. Power, Ipsos, and Retail Banker International. Hi, Katie. It is such a pleasure.
Oh my God, Natty, you're embarrassing me. Thank you. It is a total honor to be here. And your energy, oh my God, is contagious.
I love it. I love it. Well, it's because I'm so excited. Honestly, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. And, you know, as the audience heard, you're a seasoned business executive with, you know, beyond stellar 35 years plus career at RBC. But, you know, you're also a parent to 4 children, active in your community, a mentor and sponsor to many. And so I want to begin with a little bit about your personal story. Almost 2 years ago today, you came out with your decision to embrace your whole self as a woman. And you did it not only with family and friends and colleagues, but in front of thousands of RBCers. So can you take us back to the journey that led to that one pivotal moment in your life?
Thanks, Nadia. Well, unfortunately, the journey is about 45 years long. Like many of us, if not all of us on the line today. So I will take you back. I think it's important to set context around who am I, how I coped for 4 decades, really, and then what led to that, pivotal point. And then obviously June 17th, 2019 was the day 80,000 people got to hear about Katie. So I describe myself, and I think many people will relate to this. I'm not a big fan of labels, and as much as we are all celebrating and coming together to learn at a LGBTQ plus, eccentric, event, I'm not a big fan of labels because I don't think labels do justice to the whole human being. I describe myself as a woman. I identify as a woman, and I happen to have gender transition experience. I also am the child of newcomers to our country who suffered through the Second World War. My father was a Russian POW. My mother was a child refugee in Germany. They both lost parents through the Second World War. My father grew up in a household with alcoholism and abuse. And I don't want to be too dramatic, but the reality is my parents brought that trauma with them to Canada in an effort to build a better life, like many newcomers to this country, if not all newcomers to this country. They also were struggling small business owners in this country. And so I grew up with that trauma in my background. Today, I think you'd call it verbal abuse. It was just their anxiety. My parents were incredible human beings on many levels, but I grew up with that anxiety and that trauma, lots of yelling, etc. I also grew up, with what I would describe as a learning challenge, if not learning disability. I'm certain if you diagnosed me today, you'd diagnose me as dyslexic. So the reason I give you those two contexts is I can go back as far as age 5 and remember poring over my mother's jewelry box, or at age 10 or 12, putting on my sister's undergarments and stuffing them full of Kleenex and going to play in the sandbox, and scared shitless that somebody would catch me. But I have all kinds of memories of feeling drawn to women, to girl activities, feeling more female, more feminine. I have memories, as I say, as early as 5 years old. But I also had these challenges learning and teachers judging me and saying, if you only applied yourself, you'd be smarter. Parents saying you're lazy and yelling at me. And so by the time I was 13, I started to become a pretty defiant kid. And by the time I became 20, I was damn certain I was going to prove my parents that I could build a better life, and I could prove to those teachers that I was good enough. And my gender feelings never went away. They just got suppressed, and they got suppressed through two things. One I would describe as shame and self-hate, because you do learn what's expected of you. And you're assigned sex at birth. So you develop ways to suppress those female feelings, in my case, and cope. And shame and self-hate was one of them. And the other was I became very determined to prove those teachers wrong and to prove that I could build a perfect family home, and build a career and not let anybody stand in the way of my career. Well, that determination and that suppression worked for about 45 years until my children got older and they didn't need me as much, until my career matured and it wasn't as hard and as busy. And candidly, like most of us, as we approach midlife, I've always been introspective. I've always been curious, but the feelings I was having on the gender side were driving me crazy. And the more time I had, the more they drove me crazy. So, about 5 years ago, it all intensified. And I kept scratching and saying, what the heck is this? What the heck is this? And then finally, I read the National Geographic article on gender revolution, and I go, oh my God. I literally bought it and gave it to my spouse. I still couldn't fully see myself in it, but I knew there was something. My mother dies and my sisters give me her jewelry box and say, Katie, you should have this. Well, why me? I open the jewelry box and all these memories of 5 years old and 6 years old come flooding back because I knew every piece of jewelry in the jewelry box better than my sisters. And then finally, on August 25th, 2017, at 12:30 noon, I at lunch with a dear colleague and a member of our collective community, LGBT community. I said, one, how did you know you were gay? And he told me. Two, I said, what the heck is transgender? Because up until that moment in time, Nadia, every time I tried to research my feelings on the internet, I got disorder this, disorder that, transvestite this, and it only disgusted me and made me feel even more broken than I already felt. And he goes, and I said, who the heck is Caitlyn Jenner? I said, is this just another reality TV show where 5 years from now, Caitlyn transitions back to being a man? And he goes, no, read her story. She struggled with her gender feelings her entire life. I go, really? And then I said, yeah, but how can Caitlyn become a woman and still like women, like girls? And he goes, well, Caitlyn's a lesbian. At that lunch, 12:30 noon, you could have pushed me over with a feather. A whole life of questioning, a whole life of not being able to make sense, a whole life of being extraordinarily busy, self-hate. And at that one moment, it all came together. And in the following 2 or 3 weeks, I read a multitude of stories on the internet. They all affirmed what my colleague had told me. I could relate to them all. 2 weeks later, I told my spouse because I felt guilty. I felt like I had betrayed her for 30 years. And then, and then the struggles began. And Nadia, the hardest part was I finally had what I thought was an answer to my feelings, but what came with it was, am I right? How do I prove or disprove it? Because identity, gender and identity, it takes a bit to figure it out. It takes a lot to figure it out. And then what also came with it was this deep fear of judgment, rejection, all of my own self-hate kept coming through. And by, that feeling basically persisted. The feeling of wanting to prove or disprove, and the feeling of fearing my life, ruining the life of my children, ruining the life of my spouse, becoming homeless. Those feelings persisted for 12 months. While I worked through a variety of gender therapists, while I worked through dealing with a couple of psychologists, I finally got to a gender therapist that rated me at the 97th percentile of anxiety and said, you are at a severe level of gender dysphoria. And at that point, I was ready to give up. It's not fault. It's true that 80 or 90% of us in the transgender community consider suicide. It's because of those fears. It's not gender. Today, I can tell you I love myself, but it's the fears of rejection. It's the fears of judgment. It's the fear of being homeless in my case. And so I came very close to ending it. And the blessing of being older and senior is I have a network, not a big network, but a network of a few dear friends who are deeply experienced in life, in business, in psychology. And one of them said, Katie, your plan is flawed. You are going to do more damage to your children by taking your life and future generations than you will by facing your truth. So then that was September, October of 2018. And from then on, I made a commitment to myself to live for another 50 years for my children and to find a way to undertake owning myself, owning my identity in my job as good or better as anybody's ever done it before. Not because I'm better, but because one, I would need to keep my job, but two is I felt I had an advantage of being in Canada. I wasn't really rational at the point, Nadia, but I felt I had an advantage of being Canadian, and I felt I had an advantage of being at RBC, and I felt I had an advantage of my 30 years of leadership experience. So from that moment on, we told my children, I began hormone therapy. I came out to the CEO of the company and the head of HR and my boss. I literally came out to them before I ever saw Katie in the mirror. Because I knew it's one of these things. Identity is about how you feel. It's about an alignment between your inner self and your outer self. I saw myself in the mirror for the first time in March. It was exactly what I thought it would be. From that moment on, I did not want to go back to the old world because the old world wasn't the full me. Mm-hmm. And then we came out to the board of directors. I came out to senior management. We did a bunch of training. And then on June 17th, 2019, I came out to 80,000 colleagues. And then I disappeared. I worked remotely for a couple of months. And then on September 6th, 2019, Katie showed up at the office and I have never looked back. I've had challenges since then, but I have never looked back. So the important lesson I leave you with is, one is I'm a whole human being, not just a woman with gender transition experience. Two, like so many of us on this line, I've experienced the worst of mental health, the worst of fears of judgment and rejection. My own mind has been my worst enemy. And clearly I've had challenges with other people. but what I've received in the other end of all of this has been an unprecedented level of care, compassion, support. And what's still humbling to this day that I tell many people is lots of compliments around bravery and courage, which I struggle with. Lots of comments about you're going to save other people's lives, which I struggle with because I did it really selfishly to save my own life. And then thirdly, I've had so many people open up to me about their struggles with mental health, with abuse, verbal and physical, with the loss of loved ones, with different experiences in the LGBT community. You know, it was really profound because what I saw through my coming out as a human being, but also as a leader, was this side of humanity, that there's all this hurt that so many people are carrying under the surface that we bury, that fundamentally is holding people back, that somehow we don't allow the hurt to be talked about in the workplace. And the opposite of the hurt is inclusion. It's creating a sense of belonging. It's creating a deep sense of connection, being heard and respected as whole human beings. And, you know, I feel blessed now. I feel blessed that I've been able to learn about other human beings' experiences at such a deep emotional level. Sometimes it's an emotional burden, but overall, I feel blessed that I have a window into humanity where, one, I don't feel alone anymore. I felt alone and broken for years, and I suppressed it by being driven and, you know, many other things, but I no longer feel alone. And candidly, I feel a deep debt of gratitude to so many others, given my leadership role, and a desire, obviously, to help and help others. So that's my long answer to, you know, who am I and where do I come from?
I have so many follow-ups, and you know, first, thank you for being so open and honest and candid and providing not just sort of depth of the story, but also breadth of the story, right? Taking us through, you know, the entire journey, frankly, or at least giving us snapshots or windows into the trajectory of the entire journey. I think that is well, probably unique and of benefit to everybody listening. And, you know, one of the things, and I wrote it down, one of the things that really struck me, and then it's gonna lead to a question that I want to ask you, and then we'll pivot and I'll take it in another direction, but I have to ask you this. You know, you talked about shame and determination, and you talked about trauma but privilege. You know, these two sort of what I feel are kind of binary feelings, right? And then you said at the end, and I thought this was kind of a light bulb went off in my head, you know, that you struggle with the word, because to me, feeling those kind of feelings at the same time and working through them to get to where you are does take a lot of courage, an enormous amount of courage, and an enormous amount of self-reflection, as you said. But you said you struggle with the word when people say to you, you're so courageous, or, you know, say to you that you've demonstrated an enormous amount of courage. And I was just wondering if you could kind of double click on that a little bit and tell us a little bit about why that's difficult for you, given everything that you have been through. Not as you say, not just in terms of your journey to being fully yourself as a woman, but all of the other things that you said you've gone through growing up and in your life. So why does the word courage, Why is that hard for you?
If you do any research on trauma, most of us, our trauma comes from childhood and early life. So I continually, daily go back to Katie, the child. Mm-hmm. And I continue, in this moment, I don't think of myself the banker or the senior executive. I think of myself as the inner child, as that, little kid who was born innately curious and innately sensitive, highly sensitive, but also became highly determined through those early life experiences, didn't feel fully loved, like many of us through early childhood traumas. So I think that I'm my own psychologist. I've been my own psychologist. I'm deeply analytical. I've been highly reflective my whole life because I've tried to figure myself out, let alone as a leader, figure other people out and how to help them be the best that they can be. So I'm highly reflective. So, I know what the definition of courage is, to your point. I've read it and it does apply. But part of me feels selfish. Part of me feels like the little kid who was curious and sensitive was just simply trying to survive. And that's what, whether I finally got comfortable with my learning disability, or I finally got comfortable with the fact that my parents meant well, they weren't bad people, or ultimately my gender, every time I had shame, it ultimately manifested itself in determination. The result was always determination to push through. One of my most senior colleagues says, "Katie, you're a survivor." And it was one of the kindest compliments you could ever give me, is to say, "Katie, you're a survivor." So I don't think of it as I think of the word courage or bravery as some beautiful, grandiose thing, Braveheart thing, and a movie, when to me, it's just little Katie, trying to survive through determination. And so it's humbling to me when people use the word courage or bravery.
I receive that. I receive that. I can understand that, even though I would still assign you the word courage.
It's fine.
And brave.
It's
fine. So I want to get your thoughts and your insights on this idea. And you've spoken a little bit about it, but I really want to get your insights on being an inclusive leader.
Yeah.
It was just over a year ago today, right? May 25th, 2020. It's a day that I remember. An American man by the name of George Floyd was murdered at the hands of a police officer. While obviously he wasn't the first, unfortunately, his death did spark sort of global protests for justice. And what many said was different than times in the past is that the people protesting weren't just people that looked like me. They came from all walks of life, right? And included not just equity deserving groups. And the protests actually started this broader conversation around the distribution and allocation of power, of influence, of presence in corporate spaces and in the workplace. And a call to action, right? To have more people like me, like you, like others, as leaders, as influencers, as decision makers in spaces where we've been traditionally left out. Diversity and inclusion, I guess, so to speak. And as you said, you in June also had, last June would have been your first anniversary of your coming out at the workplace. Yeah. And so, I imagine that you have insights and views, and I think the audience would benefit from it, of the parallel between your own lived experience, what happened on May 25th, 2020, and the aftermath of that, and how we translate that into inclusive leadership in the workplace, in the business world, in the corporate space.
Totally. Yeah, thanks, Nadia. Totally. I've got, I think, 3 main points on this. One is part of the blessing of me coming out a year earlier and receiving so many emails from hundreds, if not thousands, of people telling me about their own hurts and their own pains, is I felt like I had a sneak peek on Black Lives Matter. I felt like I had a sneak peek on the hurts that have been percolating under the surface with so many of us, so many pockets of society, so many areas of society. So when Black Lives Matter happened, when George Floyd passed away, when he was murdered, and I watched the protests, what I watched was all the people that opened up to me about their hurt and journey. It's interesting, as a leader of 25,000 people, the early days of COVID was incredibly challenging, because how do you protect society and protect the lives of 25,000 people with this unknown pandemic? Black Lives Matter for me was harder. It literally brought to the surface all of my fears of judgment, rejection, all of the stories people had told me. And so, yes, I saw the Black community. It didn't take a rocket scientist to immediately draw connections to Canada's Indigenous people or other people, persons of color. But I saw so much more. And Obama himself said it in one of his videos, this time is different. And I don't think the majority of society picked up on what he picked up and what I was seeing. He goes, this time is different. There are people marching from every corner of society against what happened to George Floyd. Not just the Black community, or not just what happened in the gay community in the 60s in the US, or the LGBT community. And I saw it much broader. So clearly in my mind, are there structural disadvantages, structural impediments for the Black community especially in the US? You're darn right there is. The 13th Amendment is one. Are there structural impediments built into the system in Canada through the Indian Act for Indigenous people? You're damn right. Are there atrocities that are generations old that have been inflicted upon the Asian community or the persons of color community in Canada? You're darn right there is. So I'm not suggesting for a second that the work that needs to be done for the Black community, the Indigenous community, the persons of color community, etc., isn't very serious. And it is structural. But I think there's kind of a higher order thing that we observed, which is what I call systemic bias, which leads to judgment, which leads to unconscious bias and conscious bias. And that's kind of what I saw. Mm-hmm. And so coming out of it, I'm very proud of the fact that our company set goals to further advance social and economic inclusion for the Black community. We're doing more and more work in the Indigenous community. We're doing more and more work for newcomers and persons of color. But you asked the question about inclusive leadership. I think through my personal experience and professional experience, what I saw and experienced were so many dimensions of visible human uniqueness, whether I'm from the Black community, whether I'm a woman, whether I'm a person of color, whether somebody knows I'm a woman with gender transition experience. There's the visible community of diversity or human uniqueness, but there's also the invisible community. I might have an invisible disability. I may have mental health issues. I may have been abused. I may have childhood trauma. And what I felt as a leader was, yes, we need to do work to advance social and economic inclusion across disadvantaged groups of society. But I fundamentally believe, and I'm committed as a leader to doing work horizontally that builds a more inclusive world. I think we all know what it feels like when you are embraced, not supported, embraced as a whole human being. Michael McCain, when the board of directors saw my video 2 years ago, said there's a difference between supporting somebody and embracing somebody. You need to embrace Katie. And we all know what it feels like when somebody embraces you. It's a hug, it's warmth, it's full acceptance of you as a human being, as a child, and respect and listening to you and connecting with you as a whole human being. And I believe everybody deserves that. And I frankly believe when I look at all of these invisible and visible dimensions of human uniqueness, that as leaders of large companies, that we are the answer to building a kinder, more curious, more understanding, and a more empathetic world where we all feel comfortable sharing our stories. And we all feel, we all get to a deeper place of understanding of different human experiences. And that understanding will hopefully take us to a place of deeper human empathy. And, it's resulted for me, I can go on and on about this. We not only are advancing disadvantaged groups through our diversity work, but I run with my leadership team. Every month we do an inclusion dialogue with an individual where they share their unique human experience. They share their uniqueness in such a way where there's no judgment, and it's about developing understanding and empathy for different human experiences. So I think inclusive leadership is not only about building social and economic inclusion, but it ultimately is about creating deeper connections with everybody, so everybody gets to feel that care and that compassion that they deserve. But fundamentally, as business leaders, if you want to unlock the next 10 or 20% of human potential, or 30% of human potential, creativity, heart, passion, productivity, to me, the answer is inclusion. It's untapped. Anybody that's holding a secret or holding back, especially the people that have been most marginalized throughout their lives, it's almost impossible to give your whole self to society or to your company. And so whether you're motivated by the social side of this discussion, or you're a business leader and you're motivated by the productivity or creativity side of this discussion, I think both matter.
100%. And, as a follow-up, and this was actually a question that came from one of the participants as well, now that you have been able to be your authentic self everywhere, at home, at work, in the world, what has surprised you about yourself in your leadership, post post transition, post journey? What surprised you the most about your particular leadership style?
There's a convergence of factors, again, back to intersectionality. I am I won't tell you my age, but I'm old enough that if I wasn't wanted anymore, I could retire. I'm damn close. I may not be able to afford to retire, but there's something that happens with midlife is you do feel more liberated. I also have no more secrets. As I joke around with people, other than the size of my mortgage, I have no more secrets. And that is liberating. Like, it is so liberating to just live a life as me. The idea, a friend of mine, a friend of years ago, is the mayor of Ottawa, Jim Watson. Wonderful, wonderful human being. And, a month or so after my video and me coming out, and the woman on my team, Marjolaine, went to him and played him the video because St. Katie wanted you to know. Well, 6 weeks later, he wrote a letter to the members of the Ottawa community coming out as gay. Honestly, for those of us that knew Jim, weren't really surprised. But the fact that Jim led a double life for 40 years blows my mind. I know women in the LGBT or in the transgender community that lived a double life. One lived a double life for 5 years. At work and home, they were dad, and in the evenings, because they had a condo in London, England, they were female. I couldn't do that. I needed to be me. I couldn't lead a double life. I don't know how those people would do it. I admire it. I respect it. It's a way they coped, but I couldn't. So the idea that I finally got to be all of me and have no secrets at this point of life, was incredibly liberating for me. The fact that I had to come out in order to protect my job to 80,000 people was a burden, but it's also the greatest blessing of coming out because I got to see humanity in a deeper way. And I think I finally get to express myself as all of me. And the surprising part is how much fun I get to have expressing elements of my personality, whether it's my hand movements, whether it's the clothes I wear, or whether it's my sensitive and emotional side for others, my caring side, is what brings me joy. I have no need, I have no desire or need to suppress any part of myself. So I'm not sure if it's a surprise, but it brings me joy to be able to express all of myself. It brings me joy or honor to be able to have a bird's eye view into humanity and relate to other human beings' experiences. And come heck or high water, like many of us, I've chosen not to live a life of bitterness for the hurts that I've had, but live a life of care and kindness for others, because I know how deeply I need care and kindness. I can only imagine how much others need, care and kindness and curiosity and embrace for the struggles that they've had. So it's a bit of a broader answer to what surprises me. Part of it's about a privilege and an honor, and part of it is about what gives me joy.
I love that. And Ottawa is my hometown, born and raised. And so Mayor Watson,
the sweetheart.
Anyway, he's a good man. Yes, indeed. And I love this idea of, you really knowing that you can express all of yourself and having no desire to do anything but, because as you said before, that really is what belonging is about, right? In the workplace, at home, in the world. And so I love that. And, and I also think that, and this was a question in the chat as well. So I'll ask it to you. And then if you'll permit me, I'm going to ask you one other question afterwards, because I know we're supposed to wrap up, but I'm going to steal a few more minutes if you allow me. Being able to be fully who you are, to fully belong, to be your whole self. Do you feel?
Oh, I'm losing you.
Suppress, to internalize your feelings, to suppress your feelings. And, how do you think that has, not having to do that, has contributed to your now kind of work-life balance, your ability to really take care of your mental health and balance your work and your personal
Totally.
life and everything in between?
Yeah, totally. Totally. I learned through the darkest days of my journey, you know, how to cope. I need sleep. I need alone time. I had never been alone in my life until my partner and I moved into separate houses and my kids suddenly went off to university. It was September of 2019 was incredibly traumatic on the personal front for that reason. But I've really learned to love being alone, to love sleep. I get minimum 8, ideally 10 hours sleep a night. You can't go through trauma without, I believe, without becoming more empathic, or you become very bitter. And I don't think anybody wants to lead a life that's bitter. So when you become so in tune with your own emotions and the emotions of others, you become empathic. And when you lead thousands of people, you need time to decompress because you tend to take on, it brings your own emotions back and it tends to bring on the emotion, you know, you tend to take on other people's emotions. So I've learned to get sleep. I've learned to embrace my own time. I'm very strict at managing my schedule at work for the greatest impact so that I'm impactful when I'm there. I have no desire any longer to do the job of the people on my team. I constantly, because that was me being protective and worrying about looking bad. I don't worry about looking bad. I want people to flourish and I want to give them trust and kindness. And I will share my wisdom and my life experiences with them and my business experiences with them and help them grow. But I don't feel a need to work, 18 hours a day and be a perfectionist or to do other people's jobs. So I'm far better at balancing life overall than I ever was before. But I do have things that trigger anxiety for me. I now get to live the life that other women lead. I get to see sexist behavior. I get to see sometimes, thankfully not very often in today's world, men dismissing what I'm saying because I'm talking with a higher pitched voice and I'm using my hands. So that's just right brain drama, not left brain linear logical thinking. So the reality is any woman on the line would know that you bring so much to the table because you can lead with your left brain, you can lead with your right brain, and you can lead with your heart. And the world gets so much more for you. And I'm not going to suppress that, not at this point in my life, not after suppressing things for so long. But it's not lost on me that I might be getting judged in a sexist way because women are still stereotyped as not being strategic or not having business acumen or not being disciplined. When any woman on the line knows that that's BS. So I do have things that can trigger me in this new life. I almost lost you.
Don't lose me. Don't lose me. This is too good.
But for the most part, I feel free. I feel free to be me. I feel empowered to balance my life in a way that makes sense for me. It gives me joy. It gives me energy for the most part. So that's, my perspective on balancing life.
My last question. It's a short one, and I thank you in advance for indulging me. Would you do it the same again? In particular, the process at work, the coming out process at work. Would you do it the same again?
Yes, and I hope you give me a minute to share some closing thoughts.
Yes.
So the short answer is totally. one of the things that my colleagues at RBC did was they respected that it was my plan. And fortunately, I had 30 years of leadership experience. Fortunately, I had led the restructuring of a bank and the transformation of a bank. And fortunately, I had been leading the transformation of, our distribution model in Canada, and was well down the path of taking 30,000 people on this journey of transforming the bank in Canada. So I had some experience at bringing people through change. And, the great part about RBC is Helena Gottschling, the head of HR, one of the first things she said to me is, can I appoint somebody to work with you on your transition plan, the critical path, so that we can effectively partner with you? I probably drove 80% of it, and my partner, Terry Monty, who actually delayed her retirement by 6 months to support my transition and was the VP of Employee Relations for RBC, she said, Katie, it's the honor of my career to be able to work with you on this. I'm happy to delay my retirement. She partnered with me on my plan. And, I think it worked really well, from me believing that the CEO and the head of HR and Neil, my boss, deserved to learn early so that they could get their head around what even is transgender, let alone do we even want to partner with Katie? And if we do, how do we want to partner with Katie? I didn't really give them an option on the job. I went to them and I said, if I need to do this to save myself, I'll find the way to do it in this job. But I prefer you partner with me. I'm glad I went to them early. I'm glad I approached it that way. I'm glad I gave them a mountain of resource information to learn from. I'm glad Terry helped me build out the critical path. I'm glad the CEO offered to do a video at my side of my coming out. I'm glad I took 2 months to work remotely and rest after 2 or 3 years of trauma, and get ready to come back fully as me. So I have zero regrets of the way I handled it. I think anybody planning a coming out needs to be guided by what you feel is right. What you feel is right. If I had followed the textbooks, I would have told HR on one Friday, and my boss, a week later, they would have told employees. I would have taken a week off and I would have come back to work a week later. I didn't think that was right. I felt people deserved a chance to learn, to process. And candidly, I did not want rejection. I was so afraid of rejection, and I felt the longer period people had to get their head around it, the greater chances are that I wouldn't get dead named and I wouldn't get rejected. And it played out exactly as I had hoped. And the company was great.
Love it. Closing thoughts, sadly closing thoughts. I feel like I need another hour. Dale, we need another hour.
So thank you, Nadia. Thank you to you. Thank you to everybody on the line. I tell you my personal journey. I don't need sorrow. I'm great. I love myself. I'm in a place of peace. But I tell you my personal journey to signify that each of us are whole human beings, and that through struggles can come joy, can come enlightenment. The big thing I hope we all walk away with is the message around inclusive leadership and inclusion. I fundamentally believe in the core of my being as a community leader and as a business leader that yes, climate change and solving climate issues is the biggest issue of our time. But the twin sister to climate change is social and economic exclusion. The social divide in the world keeps getting further, and marginalized populations keep getting more marginalized. There are all kinds of documents that speak to different traumas that white people and persons of color, and we're all carrying around with us. And the alternative to building a kinder, more curious, more socially and economically inclusive world, the alternative is we continue to create a more divisive world. And I don't know how you can come together and solve climate change, let alone our social problems, without concurrently solving for social and economic inclusion. And creating that feeling of embrace and belonging that human beings deserve. We all carry around visible and invisible dimensions of human uniqueness. And our ability to create a more socially and economically inclusive world is critical to the future, I believe. And candidly, large companies, our companies, have to pave the way. Governments are wired too much to think short term. No offense to our government partners on the line. But businesses have the opportunity to think longer term and to tap into that human creativity and potential that might be getting lost or is likely getting lost because people are holding back. So to me, that's the call to action. It's a much higher order call to action that I think is important as we go forward. So again, thank you to the Chamber for including me. Nadia, thank you so much for being such a kind interviewer and such a great role model and partner. And again, it's been an honor.
The honor has been all mine. Thank you, Katie, so much for sharing your insights, your expertise, that call to action for each and every one of us on the line today. Again, thank you to our sponsor, EY. That concludes today's session and today's program. And I hope that you all go away really internalizing some of the amazing insights that Katie brought to us today, and especially that final call to action, that, we can't solve the world's biggest problems if we don't solve the problem of inclusion and belonging. And so thank you again, Katie. This was amazing. To all the attendees, if you want to join the after party on Zoom, we invite you to do so with DJ Ace. You can find the Zoom link by clicking on the closing reception tab, I think it's going to say, and it should be on the right-hand screen of your right-hand side of your screen, and it starts anytime now. And to play us out, I'd like to introduce a replay of Ralph's performance from the CGLCC's 2020 Black and White Gala. Thank you again, Katie, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Didn't think I was ready for love again. Every time I fall, I get my heart broken, but you've been making me rethink everything. This feeling you've created is oh so complicated. Should I let go? And lose control? Lose control. Should I let go? Will you catch me if I flow? It must be gravity, 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 yeah. Pulling you to me, you to me, you to me, yeah. Lose my breath in the atmosphere. No oxygen up here. Must be gravity, gravity. Will you catch me if I flow? me off my feet, yeah. Gravity, it's pulling you to me and I can't breathe. Gravity, it lifts me up and knocks me off my feet, yeah. Gravity, it's pulling you to me and I can't breathe. Will you catch me if I fall? Will you catch me if I fall? It must be gravity, gravity. It must be gravity, gravity. Pulling you to me, you to me. Lose my breath in the atmosphere. No oxygen out here. Must be gravity, gravity. Will you catch me if I float? Thank you so much.